My name is Cassius. I'm 29 years old, and for 3 years I've been anonymously sending my family $3,500 monthly from my finance job in New York. Due to a banking error, my sister Melody gets all the credit. At my father's 60th birthday dinner, my mother said, "Learn from your sister who sends us money every month, you ungrateful son." When I tried saying, "But that's actually me," my father exploded, "Don't try to steal your sister's accomplishments. If it's really you, then try stopping the payments." So I did. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever had your achievements stolen by a sibling, you'll want to see what happened next. I grew up in a modest 2-story home in suburban Columbus, Ohio, with parents who never tried to hide their preference for my sister. Richard and Diana Hayes, my father and mother, had very different personalities, but shared one common trait. They both thought the sun rose and set with Melody. From my earliest memories, the disparity in how we were treated was painfully obvious. Take our birthdays, for example. When Melody turned 10, my parents transformed our backyard into a carnival complete with a hired clown, pony rides, and personalized cupcakes for 30 kids. When I turned 10 just 2 years later, I got a store-bought cake and was allowed to invite 3 friends for pizza and a movie. My mother claimed it was because boys don't care about parties as much as girls do, but even then, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. The same pattern continued with our academic achievements. When Melody brought home a B+ on her report card, my parents would take her out for ice cream to celebrate her hard work. When I brought home straight A's, my father would glance at it and say, "That's what we expect from you," before returning to his newspaper. My mother might say, "Good job, Cassius," but there was never any celebration, never any recognition that I had actually accomplished something difficult. Sports were no different. I was a championship swimmer throughout high school, breaking 2 regional records my senior year. My trophies and medals were kept in a box in the basement, while Melody's participation trophies for 1 season of junior varsity volleyball occupied the front and center position in our family's trophy cabinet. "Your sister needs the encouragement," my mother explained when I questioned the arrangement. "You don't need trophies to validate you." My father, Richard, was an electrical engineer with deeply traditional values about masculinity and success. He had grown up with a father who worked in the coal mines of West Virginia, a man who measured his worth by his ability to put food on the table. My grandfather had passed those values down to my father, who then tried to instill them in me. "Men should be providers, not complainers," was one of his favorite sayings whenever I expressed any dissatisfaction with how I was being treated. "Stop whining and start doing something worthwhile with yourself." Emotional stoicism was expected of me from a young age. When I fell and broke my arm at age 7, my father told me to tough it out as he drove me to the hospital, while I sat in the back seat trying not to cry. When Melody sprained her ankle at 13, he carried her to the car and stroked her hair the entire way to the emergency room, telling her how brave she was. To my father, financial success was the primary measure of a man's worth. He would evaluate every male acquaintance based on their job, their car, their house. "See that man?" he'd say, pointing out someone with a luxury vehicle at church. "That's what success looks like, Cassius. That's what you should be aiming for." My mother, Diana, was a high school English teacher with a passive-aggressive communication style that could cut deeper than my father's direct criticism. She specialized in constant comparison between my sister and me. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. Whether it was about keeping my room clean, or how I spoke to adults, or the way I dressed, everything was measured against Melody's supposed perfection. Her comments were designed to seem helpful but always left me feeling inadequate. "You know, Cassius, you might make more friends if you were outgoing like Melody." Or, "Those grades are good, but imagine if you applied yourself the way your sister does, you could be exceptional." She was the master of the backhanded compliment. "You clean up well when you actually try," she'd say if I dressed up for a special occasion, as if my normal appearance was somehow disappointing to her. Melody herself, 2 years older than me at 31, had perfected the art of being 2 different people. To the outside world, especially to our parents, she was charming, thoughtful, and accomplished. She knew exactly how to work people, how to make them feel special, while simultaneously elevating herself in their eyes. But privately, Melody was calculating and manipulative. She had an uncanny ability to take credit for other people's work. In high school, she somehow managed to get her name listed first on a science project that I had stayed up 3 nights completing. In college, according to mutual friends, she would contribute minimally to group assignments but somehow end up receiving the highest praise during presentations. While maintaining her perfect image to our parents, Melody's real life was actually chaotic. She bounced between jobs every 6 to 18 months, always with a dramatic story about toxic workplaces or unappreciative bosses. Her romantic relationships followed a similar pattern, intense beginnings followed by spectacular implosions that were never somehow her fault. Family gatherings were exercises in walking on eggshells. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, all featured the same tense dynamic beneath forced smiles. My father's temper would flare at the slightest provocation, usually directed at me if I spoke too loudly, or used the wrong fork, or didn't compliment my mother's cooking enthusiastically enough. Melody would hold court, regaling everyone with exaggerated stories of her achievements, while my mother beamed with pride. I would sit quietly, knowing that drawing attention to myself usually resulted in some form of criticism. Cassius is doing fine at his little office job, my mother would tell relatives when asked about me, dismissing my career with vague generalities, while spending 20 minutes detailing Melody's most recent promotion, which I later learned was usually just a title change with no additional responsibility or compensation. I learned to exist on the periphery of my own family, a supporting character in the ongoing drama that revolved around my sister. I became skilled at nodding, smiling, and finding reasons to leave rooms when conversations became too uncomfortable. I developed the ability to appear engaged while mentally transporting myself elsewhere, counting the minutes until I could return to the relative safety of my own life, away from their judgment. I left home the day after high school graduation, determined to prove myself even if no one in my family was watching. With a small scholarship and student loans to cover the rest, I enrolled at State University, 3 hours and a world away from Columbus. My parents seemed almost relieved to see me go, dropping me off at the dormitory with a quick hug and reminders to study hard before driving off to help Melody decorate her new apartment near her, more prestigious university. That first year was an education in more ways than one. For the first time, I was completely responsible for myself, my schedule, my finances, my successes and failures. I worked 20 hours a week at the university bookstore while carrying a full course load. My tiny dorm room with its persistent smell of mildew and a roommate who played video games until 3 in the morning was still preferable to being at home, where I was constantly measuring myself against impossible standards and coming up short. The finance and accounting classes that would eventually lead to my career were brutal. Numbers had never come easily to me the way words did, but I was determined to succeed in a field that my father would respect. I studied until my eyes burned, joined study groups with smarter classmates, and visited professors during office hours to clarify concepts I couldn't grasp. It was during one of these office hour visits that I met Professor Harrison, the first person who seemed to see potential in me that had nothing to do with my sister. A former investment banker with a no-nonsense teaching style, Harrison intimidated most students. But when I showed up at his office with specific, well-researched questions about portfolio diversification strategies, something changed in his demeanor. "You know, Hayes," he said, he never used first names, "you think differently than most of the robots I teach. You're actually considering the human element behind the numbers. That's rare." That single comment did more for my confidence than 18 years of living with my family. Harrison became my mentor, recommending me for an internship at a local financial advisory firm the summer after my sophomore year. That internship changed everything. I discovered I had a talent for explaining complex financial concepts in simple terms that clients could understand. I wasn't just good with numbers, I was good with people, and that combination made me valuable. The firm offered me a part-time position during my junior and senior years, and I graduated with actual experience on my resume. My first full-time job after college wasn't glamorous. I worked at a small firm where the owner, Walter, took credit for my ideas and paid me barely enough to cover rent and student loan payments. I lived in a rundown apartment with 2 roommates, ate ramen noodles more often than I'd like to admit, and wondered if I had made a terrible career choice. 8 months in, during a company restructuring, I was laid off. Walter called it a strategic reduction in workforce, but I later learned he'd kept his nephew, who had just graduated with a communications degree and no finance experience. I spent a week in a depression, barely leaving my room, ignoring calls from my roommates and friends. My parents didn't know I hadn't told them about the job loss, knowing it would just confirm their low expectations of me. On the 8th day, I got angry. Not the explosive anger of my father, but a cold, focused rage that propelled me out of bed and into action. I updated my resume, reached out to Professor Harrison for a reference, and applied to 23 positions in 48 hours. 2 weeks later, I interviewed at Davidson and Murrow, a prestigious investment firm that normally wouldn't look twice at someone with my limited experience. But Harrison had called in a favor with a former colleague, and I had spent days preparing for the interview, researching the company's recent projects and developing ideas specific to their client base. The hiring manager, Sophia Williams, was clearly skeptical when I walked in. "Your resume is thin," she said bluntly. "Convince me why we should take a chance on you." Instead of giving a generic answer about being a hard worker or fast learner, I pulled out a folder containing a detailed analysis of how one of their publicly disclosed investment strategies could be optimized for their demographic of clients. It wasn't perfect. I learned later that I had overlooked some regulatory constraints, but it showed innovative thinking and preparation that apparently no other candidate had demonstrated. I left with a job offer that doubled my previous salary and a clear understanding of the expectations. Work hard, learn fast, prove yourself, and I did. For the first 2 years, I regularly worked 80-hour weeks, coming in early to prepare for meetings and staying late to ensure every detail was perfect. I volunteered for the projects no one wanted, became the go-to person for difficult clients, and continuously educated myself on emerging market trends. My breakthrough came during my 3rd year at the firm. A major client was considering pulling their 8-figure portfolio due to concerns about market volatility. I spent a weekend analyzing their specific holdings and developing a custom hedging strategy that would protect their principal while still allowing for growth in certain sectors. The presentation to the client was supposed to be handled by my supervisor, but he came down with food poisoning the night before. I was thrust into the spotlight, presenting directly to the client's board of directors with less than 12 hours to prepare. Not only did we retain the client, but they increased their investment by 30% based on my recommendations. 3 months later, I was promoted to senior advisor with my own client portfolio to manage. By 28, I was the youngest person at my level in the company's history. By 29, my current age, I was managing over $200 million in investments and had developed a reputation for creative problem-solving and exceptional client retention. With success came financial security I had never known. I moved from my shared apartment to a 1-bedroom in a doorman building. I bought clothes that weren't on clearance. I started a substantial retirement fund and paid off my student loans years ahead of schedule. For the first time in my life, I had more than enough. It was around this time that I learned about my parents' financial struggles. My father had been forced into early retirement due to company downsizing, and my mother's teacher's pension wasn't enough to maintain their lifestyle. They hadn't saved adequately, assuming my father would work until 65 at his full salary. Despite years of emotional neglect, I couldn't bear the thought of them struggling. I set up an anonymous monthly transfer of $3,500, enough to cover their mortgage and utilities, but not so much that they would become suspicious about the source. I instructed my bank to list it as a family support payment with no further details. What I didn't anticipate was a clerical error at the bank that somehow attached Melody's name to the transfers. I only discovered this months later when my mother called, gushing about how generous your sister was being and how she'd really stepped up for the family. I could have corrected the misunderstanding then, but something stopped me. Part of me wanted to see how long this would go on, how long they would continue to attribute to Melody something that she hadn't done. Another part, the part I'm not proud of, was curious about how they would treat me if they ever discovered the truth. And so I said nothing, continuing the payments while listening to my parents sing Melody's praises during our infrequent phone calls. "Your sister is so successful," they would say. "She's really made something of herself." All while believing I was barely getting by in my little office job. The irony might have been amusing if it hadn't been so painful. My father's 60th birthday brought me back to Columbus for the first time in 8 months. I had missed the previous Thanksgiving and Christmas, citing work commitments that weren't entirely fictional. The truth was, I had reached a point where each visit home left me emotionally drained for weeks afterward. As my flight descended toward Ohio, I could feel the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I had sent an expensive watch as my father's birthday gift, a Rolex Datejust that cost more than my monthly rent, but had received only a brief text message in response. "Thanks for the watch." No acknowledgement of the significance of the gift, no recognition that it represented a level of success he had always pushed me toward. I rented a car at the airport instead of asking for a pickup, giving myself the freedom to escape if necessary. Pulling into the driveway of my childhood home, I took several deep breaths and put on what my college roommate used to call my game face, pleasant, unaffected, impervious to criticism. My mother answered the door with a distracted air, her eyes immediately looking past me toward the driveway. "Is Melody with you?" she asked instead of a greeting. "No, Mom. We don't live in the same city, remember? She's in Chicago. I'm in New York." I stepped inside, dragging my weekend bag behind me. Of course," she said, finally offering a brief hug. "It's just that she said she might pick you up from the airport. She's always so thoughtful that way." I bit back the obvious response that if Melody had planned to pick me up, she would have told me and instead asked, "How's Dad?" "Oh, you know your father. Grumpy about turning 60. Go say hello, he's in the den watching the game." My father was indeed watching football, but his attention shifted to me as soon as I entered the room. His eyes performed the usual inspection, taking in my haircut, too long, my clothes, too formal for a family gathering apparently, my overall appearance, too thin, not enough sun. "Cassius," he said with a nod, not rising from his recliner. "Glad you could make it. Happy birthday, Dad. How does it feel to be 60? Feels like 59, but with more people reminding you you're getting old." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down. Tell me about New York. Still at that same company?" This was his way of asking if I had advanced in my career, if I was finally becoming the success he had always demanded. I sat and gave him the simplified version of my professional life. Challenging but rewarding, good prospects for the future, enjoying the city. I didn't mention my promotion, my client portfolio, or my income. Experience had taught me that sharing achievements only led to them being minimized or compared unfavorably to Melody's. Speaking of Melody, she arrived with her trademark dramatic entrance about an hour later. The doorbell rang repeatedly, followed by her voice calling out, "The favorite child has arrived. Where's my birthday boy?" My father transformed before my eyes, rising from his chair with newfound energy, his face breaking into a wide smile. "There she is," he called back, heading to the front door. I remained seated, listening to the effusive greetings, the exclamations over how wonderful she looked, the laughter at whatever clever thing she had just said. When they entered the den, Melody gave me a quick, artificial hug. "Little brother, looking corporate as always. Do they make you wear a tie on weekends too?" She laughed as though she'd said something hilarious, and my parents chuckled along. "Good to see you too, Melody," I replied with a practiced smile. Dinner was scheduled for 6 o'clock. My mother had prepared all of Melody's favorite dishes, her famous pot roast, scalloped potatoes, roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon, which Melody claimed to have introduced to the family, though I had been making them for years, and chocolate lava cake for dessert. We gathered around the dining table that had been in my mother's family for generations, a heavy oak piece that had witnessed countless family dynamics play out over its polished surface. My father sat at the head, my mother at the foot, with Melody and me facing each other across the middle. The good china was out, along with the crystal glasses that were only used for special occasions. The tension beneath the celebration was palpable, at least to me. My mother fluttered around Melody, refilling her water glass whenever it dropped below half, asking if the temperature of the food was to her liking. My father engaged her in animated conversation about her job in pharmaceutical sales, asking detailed questions about her clients and strategies. When the conversation occasionally turned to me, it was perfunctory. "And Cassius, how is your work?" my mother asked, during a lull, as though suddenly remembering I was there. Before I could respond, my father raised his glass. "Before we get too far into dinner, I'd like to propose a toast." We all lifted our glasses. To 60 years of life, not all easy, but all worthwhile. A man's legacy is built on the foundation of his family, and I'm proud of what we've created here. His eyes lingered on Melody as he continued. "Some of you have exceeded every expectation." Then, shifting briefly to me, "Others are still finding their way. But together, we represent the Hayes family values of hard work, determination, and loyalty." He concluded with a pointed statement that felt directed squarely at me. "Real achievement isn't about fancy addresses or impressive titles. It's about what you contribute to the people who raised you, who made you who you are." We clinked glasses, and I took a large swallow of wine, needing something to dissolve the lump forming in my throat. As we ate, my mother steered the conversation toward family finances, an unusual topic for a birthday dinner, but one that had clearly been planned. "Richard and I have been doing some recalculating lately," she began, setting down her fork. "With your father's early retirement and those medical bills from his heart scare last year, our savings aren't going as far as we'd hoped." My father looked uncomfortable but nodded in agreement. "The pension isn't what they promised, and inflation is eating away at what we put aside." I started to offer assistance to finally reveal that I had been the one helping them all along when my mother continued, her gaze fixed on Melody. "Thank goodness for your sister's monthly support. That $3,500 has been making all the difference. We've been able to keep the house, stay current on your father's medications, even help Mrs. Winslow next door when her furnace went out last winter." Melody smiled modestly, accepting the praise with a small nod. "It's nothing, really. You guys gave me everything growing up. It's the least I can do." Then my mother's eyes turned to me, her expression hardening almost imperceptibly. "You should learn from your sister, Cassius. She's been supporting this family for 3 years now while you've barely called, much less contributed." The unfairness of it hit me like a physical blow. 3 years of quietly supporting them, asking nothing in return, not even recognition. And here was my mother, comparing me unfavorably to the person who was taking credit for my generosity. "You've always been so focused on yourself," she continued. "Your job, your life in New York. You've never thought about what we might need back here." My father joined in, his voice carrying the disappointment I'd heard my entire life. "Your sister understands family responsibility. She's built a successful career and still remembers where she came from." Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively, like a twig underfoot in a silent forest. "Actually," I said, my voice calmer than I felt, "that's been me. I'm the one who's been sending the money every month." The table fell silent. My mother's face registered confusion. Melody's eyes widened in panic, and my father, his expression darkened like a thundercloud. "What are you talking about?" my mother finally asked. "The monthly transfers. There was a mistake at the bank. They've been coming from my account, not Melody's." Before I could elaborate, my father's fist came down on the table hard enough to make the glasses jump. "Don't try to steal your sister's accomplishments," he shouted. "She's been helping us while you've been off playing big shot in New York." "Dad, No," he cut me off. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that's always disappointed me. Always trying to one-up your sister, always needing to be the center of attention." My mother looked between us, clearly unsure what to believe. Melody sat frozen, her face a mask of artificial concern hiding very real fear. My father delivered what he thought was the killing blow. "If it's really you sending the money, then try stopping the payments. See what happens." The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at each of their faces, my father's red with anger, my mother's pinched with confusion, Melody's carefully composed in a simulation of injured innocence. "Maybe I will," I said quietly. The rest of dinner passed in strained conversation about neutral topics, the weather, the neighbors, my father's golf game. I retreated into the shell I had perfected over years of family gatherings, saying little, agreeing with whatever was said, waiting for an appropriate moment to excuse myself. As soon as dessert was over, I claimed an early flight the next morning, and the need to review work documents as my reason for retiring to the guest room. No one protested. No one asked me to stay. In the quiet of that room, with its outdated wallpaper and the same twin bed I'd slept in as a teenager, I made a decision that would change everything. Later that night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars I had placed as a child still faintly emitted their greenish light. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had created my own constellation on that ceiling because my father had refused to buy me a telescope. "Those are for kids who have potential in science," he had said. "Melody's the one who's good at that." Melody had received a telescope for Christmas that same year. She used it twice. I replayed childhood memories in my mind, examining them with adult perspective. The time I won the 5th grade spelling bee, but my parents missed it for Melody's dance recital. The high school graduation where my father's only comment on my valedictorian speech was that I should have made eye contact more like Melody did during her class president address the year before. The college acceptance letters, mine to State with a partial scholarship, hers to Brentwood with no financial aid, and how my father had framed hers while mine was pinned to the refrigerator temporarily before disappearing. Why did I continue trying to win their approval? What was I hoping to prove, and to whom? I reached for my phone and called Kyle, my best friend since college, who understood my family dynamic better than anyone. "Hey man," he answered, despite the late hour. "How's the birthday extravaganza?" "A disaster," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Complete disaster." I recounted the dinner conversation, my revelation, my father's accusation, the challenge to stop payments. Those ungrateful Kyle cut himself off. "Sorry, I know they're your parents, but seriously? You've been bankrolling them for 3 years and they've been giving your sister all the credit?" "That's about the size of it," I said, feeling a strange relief at having someone validate my feelings. "And your sister just let them believe it was her? That's next level messed up, Cass. It gets worse. Apparently she's been actively taking credit for it, acting like it's her big sacrifice to help the family." Kyle was silent for a moment. "They don't deserve your money, man. You know that, right?" Did I know that? I wasn't sure. Despite everything, they were still my parents, still the people who had raised me, however imperfectly. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Part of me wants to just cut off the payments, like Dad challenged, but then what happens to them? Their mortgage, Dad's medications." "That's not your responsibility," Kyle insisted. "Especially not when they treat you like this. Would they do the same for you if the situations were reversed?" We both knew the answer to that. "Look, I'm not telling you what to do," Kyle continued, "but maybe it's time to start putting yourself first for once. You've spent your whole life trying to earn their approval. When is it enough?" After we hung up, I couldn't stop thinking about Kyle's question. When would it be enough? When would I stop trying to prove myself to people who seemed constitutionally incapable of seeing my worth? I thought about other times Melody had taken credit for my work or accomplishments. There was the family recipe for bourbon pecan pie that I had perfected after months of tweaking the traditional formula. Melody had taken my recipe to a family reunion, claimed it as her own creation, and received effusive praise from relatives. When I mentioned that it was actually my recipe, I was met with skeptical looks, and my Aunt Barbara saying, "Now Cassius, don't be jealous of your sister's talents." Then there was the school science project in 8th grade. A working model of a hydroelectric dam that I had built entirely on my own. Melody, then a sophomore in high school, had casually mentioned the project to my parents as the damn thing Cassius and I have been working on, despite not having lifted a finger to help. When it won first prize, my parents congratulated us both. It was a pattern throughout our lives, Melody positioning herself to share in or outright steal any recognition that might come my way, while my parents either enabled the behavior or remained willfully blind to it. I opened my banking app and navigated to the recurring transfers section. The next payment was scheduled for the 15th of the following month, 2 weeks away. My finger hovered over the cancel recurring payment button. Was I really going to do this? Cut off my parents financially to prove a point? But it wasn't just about proving a point, I realized. It was about finally standing up for myself, about refusing to participate any longer in a family dynamic that had been harmful to me for decades. It was about setting a boundary, perhaps the first real boundary I had ever established with my family. I pressed the button. A confirmation dialogue appeared. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment?" I was. I added a note to the final payment, scheduled to process in the morning. Last support payment from Cassius Hayes. The bank would see it, even if my parents never did. Sleep came eventually, a restless, dream-filled slumber where I kept trying to explain myself to my parents, but no sound would come out of my mouth. I left early the next morning, before anyone else was awake. I left a note on the kitchen counter, had to catch my flight. "Happy birthday again, Dad. Cassius." The drive to the airport was silent. No radio, no calls, just the sound of tires on asphalt and my own thoughts churning. I felt hollow, as though I'd left behind more than just my family home. I'd left behind the version of myself that still hoped, somehow, to be seen and valued by the people who should have seen and valued me all along. The flight back to New York was a blur. I declined the complimentary beverage, closed my eyes, and tried to process the emotions cycling through me. Guilt, anger, resolve, sadness, and underneath it all, a strange sense of liberation. I was 33,000 feet in the air when I realized, for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself over my family's expectations or approval. Whether it was the right decision remained to be seen, but it was, undeniably, my decision. The month after my father's birthday passed quickly, filled with client meetings and market analyses that kept my mind occupied during working hours. But in the quiet moments, early mornings before my alarm, late evenings in my apartment overlooking the city lights, weekends, when friends were busy with their own lives, my thoughts inevitably turned to my family and the impending fallout. The 15th of the month arrived, and I checked my bank account to confirm what I already knew. The transfer had not been made. For the first time in 3 years, $3,500 remained in my account instead of going to my parents. I felt a complicated mixture of guilt and righteousness, wondering how long it would take them to notice. The answer came just 2 days later. My phone rang during a client meeting my mother's number. I sent it to voicemail and tried to focus on the presentation I was giving about emerging market opportunities. By the end of the day, I had 3 missed calls from her and a voicemail that carefully avoided the real issue. "Cassius, it's Mom. Could you call us back as soon as possible? We're having a bit of a financial emergency, and we'd like to discuss it with you. Hope you're doing well in New York." No mention of Melody, no reference to the missing payment, just a vague financial emergency that I was apparently now being included in. I didn't call back. Part of me felt petty for this choice, but another part recognized it as self-preservation. Any conversation now would devolve into accusations and guilt-tripping before the truth could even be addressed. The calls continued over the next week. My father started calling as well, his voicemails becoming increasingly pointed. "Cassius, it's Dad. Your mother has been trying to reach you. This is important family business. Call us back." And then, "Son, I don't know what game you're playing by ignoring our calls, but it stops now. Family has responsibilities to each other. Call us." Finally, "If you're trying to make some kind of point with this silent treatment, it's not working. It's just confirming what I've always said about your maturity level. Man up and call your parents." Still no direct mention of the money. Still dancing around the central issue. Melody was conspicuously silent during this time. No calls, no texts, which was unusual. She typically reached out at least once a month with some manufactured crisis or request for advice she had no intention of following. Her silence spoke volumes. Then, 18 days after the missed payment, my building doorman called up to my apartment. "Mr. Hayes, there's a Melody Hayes here to see you. She says she's your sister." I nearly dropped my phone. "She's in New York?" "Yes, sir. She's quite insistent about seeing you." I considered refusing, telling him to send her away. But this confrontation was inevitable, and perhaps it was better to have it on my home turf. "Send her up, please." 3 minutes later, a sharp knock on my door announced her arrival. I opened it to find Melody looking distinctly unlike herself. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled hair pulled back carelessly, minimal makeup, clothing that looked slept in. Her eyes were red-rimmed, either from crying or lack of sleep or both. "We need to talk," she said without preamble, pushing past me into my apartment. She stopped in the entryway, taking in the space with obvious surprise. My apartment wasn't extravagant by New York standards, but it was certainly nicer than what someone in a little office job should be able to afford: hardwood floors, high ceilings, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows with a partial view of the park. "This is where you live?" she asked, her tone accusing, as though I had been deliberately deceiving the family about my circumstances. "Yes," I replied simply. "Would you like some coffee?" "I don't want coffee, Cassius. I want to know why you stopped the payments to Mom and Dad." So we were getting right to it. No pretense, no manipulation at least. Not the subtle kind she usually employed. "You mean the payments everyone thought were coming from you?" I kept my voice level, determined not to let emotion drive this conversation. Melody's shoulders slumped, and she sank onto my couch uninvited. "Look, I never asked for that. It was a mistake, and then it just continued. A mistake that you actively perpetuated. A mistake that you used to boost your standing with Mom and Dad." "It wasn't like that," she protested weakly. "Then what was it like, Melody? Explain it to me. Help me understand how my sister allowed our parents to believe she was financially supporting them when it was actually me." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its defensive edge. "It started with Mom calling to thank me for the money." I was confused, but before I could correct her, she was going on about how proud she was, how she'd always known I would take care of them, and you couldn't bring yourself to tell her the truth. I was going to, but then, it felt so good, Cassius, to have them look at me the way they've always looked at you. I laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "The way they've always looked at me? Are you serious right now?" Melody seemed genuinely confused. "Yes, the smart one, the responsible one, the one who was going to be successful. Do you have any idea what it's like growing up as the disappointing child?" I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. "Melody, they adored you. They still adore you. Everything you did was celebrated. Everything I did was expected or ignored." She shook her head. "That's not how it was. They pushed me because they didn't think I was good enough. They left you alone because they knew you'd succeed regardless." We were silent, both contemplating this fundamental disconnect in how we had experienced our shared childhood. Had we really grown up in the same household with such completely different perceptions? "Regardless," I finally said, "you knew the money was coming from me, and you let them believe it was from you, for 3 years. She didn't deny it. And now you've stopped it to, what, expose me, get back at them. I stopped it because I'm done enabling this whole dysfunctional dynamic. I'm done being the family ATM, while also being the family disappointment." "You don't understand what you've done," Melody said, leaning forward. "They're counting on that money. Dad's medication isn't fully covered by insurance. The house needs a new roof. And you couldn't help with any of that? What exactly do you do with your pharmaceutical sales income, Melody?" Her gaze dropped again. I don't have that job anymore." "Since when?" "Since about 18 months ago. I've been doing gig work, some consulting, but it's not stable." The pieces started falling into place. "So, when Mom and Dad talk about your successful career, I let them believe what they want to believe," she admitted. "It's easier than disappointing them." "What happened to the pharmaceutical job?" Melody sighed. "I got fired for fudging my sales numbers. I was trying to keep up with the top performers, took some shortcuts, got caught." "And your apartment in Chicago?" "I had to give it up last year. I've been staying with friends, subletting when I can afford it." "So, where are you living now?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Back with Mom and Dad," she confirmed. "Temporarily," I told them. "Just until my next big contract comes through." The more we talked, the clearer the picture became. Melody was in massive credit card debt from trying to maintain the appearance of success. She had started and failed 3 different entrepreneurial ventures that our parents knew nothing about. She was essentially homeless and unemployed, surviving on a combination of her charm and other people's goodwill. "And you never thought to tell Mom and Dad the truth?" to ask for help openly, instead of perpetuating this fiction. You don't understand, she insisted. They would be devastated. All these years they've been bragging about me to the neighbors, to the family. Melody's doing so well. Melody's got such a bright future. Finding out it was all a lie would kill them. So instead, you let them believe you were financially supporting them, when actually you're living off them. I'm not proud of it, she said quietly. But I didn't know what else to do. And then you had to go and complicate everything by telling them you were sending the money. I told them the truth. I corrected her. Something you might want to try sometime. The truth isn't going to pay their mortgage, she shot back. Neither are you, apparently. We glared at each other across the coffee table. Years of sibling rivalry and resentment crystallized in this moment. So what happens now? She finally asked. Are you going to tell them everything? About me living with them? About the job? All of it? That's not my truth to tell, I said. But I'm not resuming the payments, Melody. Not until Mom and Dad understand who's really been supporting whom. They'll lose the house, she said, a desperate edge to her voice. Dad will have to stop some of his medications. Is that what you want? What I want is honesty. What I want is recognition for what I've contributed. What I want is to stop being the family scapegoat while you get credit for things you haven't done. Please, she said, and I was shocked to see tears in her eyes. I'm begging you. Just one more month, until I can figure something out. They'll disown me if they know the truth. They won't disown you, I said with absolute certainty. They've never held you to the same standards they've held me. They'll be disappointed, maybe angry, but they'll forgive you. They always do. What about you? She asked. Will you forgive me for letting this go on so long? I didn't have an answer for that yet. I need you to leave now, Melody. I have work tomorrow. Cassius, please. I'm done living in your shadow, I said, standing up to show her to the door. I'm done watching you take credit for my accomplishments. I'm done with all of it. The truth needs to come out, one way or another. And if I tell them myself? She asked, a last desperate attempt. That would be a start, I conceded, but it won't change my decision about the payments. She left without another word, shoulders hunched as though carrying a physical burden. I watched through my peephole as she waited for the elevator, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. For the first time, I wondered if Melody was as much a victim of our parents' dysfunction as I was, just in a completely different way. 4 days after Melody's visit, my assistant buzzed my office intercom. Mr. Hayes, there are 2 people here to see you. They don't have an appointment, but they're saying they're your parents? I froze, fingers hovering over my keyboard. I had been in the middle of drafting an investment proposal for a potential new client, focused, productive, temporarily free of family drama. Now reality came crashing back. How did they even find my office? I wondered aloud, though I suspected Melody had given them the address. Should I ask them to wait, or? My assistant prompted when I didn't respond. I glanced at my calendar. I had a meeting in 45 minutes that I couldn't reschedule. Tell them I'll be out in 5 minutes, I said, needing the time to compose myself. I straightened my tie, took several deep breaths, and tried to prepare for whatever was coming. Then I walked out to the reception area where my parents were waiting. They looked out of place in the sleek, modern office with its glass and chrome aesthetics. My father wore what I recognized as his church suit, slightly outdated but well-maintained. My mother had on a floral dress I'd seen her wear to weddings and funerals. They had dressed up to come confront me, as though this were a formal occasion requiring their Sunday best. Mom, Dad, I said, hyper-aware of my assistant and several colleagues within earshot. This is a surprise. We need to talk to you, my father said, his voice carrying in the quiet reception area. Now, I have a meeting soon, but we can go to a coffee shop around the corner, I offered, wanting to avoid a scene at my workplace. Fine, he agreed curtly. We walked in uncomfortable silence to the elevator, rode down 23 floors without speaking, and made our way to a small cafe I frequented during lunch breaks. After ordering black coffee for my father, herbal tea for my mother, an Americano for me, we settled at a corner table away from other patrons. My father wasted no time. What did you do to the money? Not how are you, or nice office, Straight to accusations. I stopped the transfers, I said calmly, just like you challenged me to at dinner. This isn't a game, Cassius, he snapped. Your mother and I have financial obligations. The mortgage payment was due yesterday. Your sister has been supporting us for years, and suddenly the money stops right after you make some ridiculous claim that it was coming from you? My mother jumped in, her voice quavering. We don't understand why you'd do something like this. Why you'd try to interfere with your sister's help. I looked between them, these people who had raised me, but somehow never really seen me. It's not a claim. It's the truth. I've been sending that money every month for 3 years. That's absurd, my father dismissed. You can barely afford that apartment in New York on what you make. You have no idea what I make, Dad. You've never asked. Don't try to change the subject. Your sister confirmed that the payments come from her account. She showed your mother the bank statements. That was unexpected. Melody had actually falsified documents to maintain her lie. How far was she willing to go? Those statements aren't real, I said. If you'd like, I can show you the actual transfers from my account. I have the records right here. I reached for my phone. More fabrications. My father scoffed. I'm disappointed in you, son. I thought we raised you better than this. My mother's approach was more emotional. Cassius, honey, we're in real trouble here. The mortgage payment bounced. Your father's heart medication refill is due next week. We were counting on that money. The guilt trip was familiar territory, but this time, I was prepared for it. I understand this is difficult, I said evenly, but I'm not going to keep sending money anonymously while Melody gets the credit and I get criticized for not contributing to the family. So this is about recognition? My father's voice rose. About getting a pat on the head? Grow up, Cassius. A few cafe patrons glanced our way, and I lowered my voice, encouraging them to do the same. This isn't about recognition. It's about honesty. It's about the fact that you've always seen what you wanted to see when it comes to both me and Melody. What's that supposed to mean? My mother asked defensively. It means that Melody isn't the successful pharmaceutical sales representative you think she is. She was fired over 1.5 years ago. She's been living with you, not because she's between fancy apartments, but because she can't afford her own place. And she certainly hasn't been sending you $3,500 every month. My parents exchanged looks. I could see doubt beginning to creep into my mother's expression, but my father remained steadfast in his denial. More lies, he said, but with less conviction than before. Why are you trying to tear down your sister? What kind of man does that make you? Something snapped inside me, not in anger, but in clarity. I placed my phone on the table and pulled a folder from my messenger bag. These are bank statements showing the transfers from my account to yours, dating back 3 years, I said, sliding the folder toward them. Every monthly transfer is highlighted. You'll notice they match exactly the amounts and dates of the payments you've been receiving. My father ignored the folder, but my mother hesitantly opened it, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. This could be faked, my father insisted, though he hadn't even looked at the documents. Then call the bank, I suggested, dialing a number on my phone and putting it on speaker. I have customer service on the line right now. They can verify the sender of those transfers. My father started to object, but I was already speaking to the customer service representative. Hello, this is Cassius Hayes. I'm calling with my parents present to verify some information about recurring transfers from my account. I have the transfer verification numbers here. What followed was 5 minutes of the customer service rep confirming exactly what I had claimed, that I, Cassius Hayes, had been making monthly transfers to Richard and Diana Hayes for the past 3 years, that a system error had briefly shown an incorrect sender name on the recipient's end, and that the transfers had been discontinued as of the current month. By the time the call ended, the color had drained from my father's face. My mother was staring at the bank statements, flipping through them with trembling hands. I don't understand, she said quietly. Melody showed us her statements. Melody has been lying to you, I said gently, about a lot of things, but why would she? My father couldn't even complete the sentence. The foundation of his worldview, his golden daughter, his disappointing son was crumbling before his eyes. Because it was easier than telling you the truth, I said. because she knew how much her success meant to you, and she couldn't bear to let you down. My mother's eyes filled with tears. All this time, it was you helping us? I nodded. And we never. She trailed off, the implications of their behavior toward me finally sinking in. My father sat in stunned silence, his coffee cooling untouched before him. For the first time in my life, I was seeing him without his armor of certainty and judgment. He looked suddenly older, diminished. I want to be clear about something, I said, keeping my tone even. I didn't stop the payments to hurt you or to force this confrontation. I stopped because I'm no longer willing to participate in a family dynamic that's been harmful to me for most of my life. What do you mean harmful? My mother asked, genuine confusion in her voice. I mean the constant comparison to Melody, the criticism, the dismissal of my achievements, the assumption that I was less than less successful, less worthy of praise, less important to the family. We never thought that, she protested weakly. You may not have thought it consciously, but it's how you behaved. It's what you communicated to me every day growing up, and still do as an adult. My father finally spoke, his voice lacking its usual authority. So what happens now? Are you going to hold the money over our heads? Make us beg? No, I said firmly. I'm not like that, though I understand why you might think I am. You've never really known me. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Here's what I'm proposing. I won't be resuming the automatic monthly transfers. Instead, if you need help with specific expenses, the mortgage, Dad's medications, home repairs, you can ask me directly. I'll consider each request on its merits, but I'll expect to be treated with basic respect in return. And if we don't? My father asked, a hint of his old defiance returning. Then you'll need to find another solution. I'm not responsible for supporting you financially, especially not when that support comes with emotional abuse. Abuse? My mother echoed, shocked. We never abused you. Not physically. No. But there are other kinds of abuse, Mom. Constant criticism, favoritism, dismissing someone's feelings and experiences, those leave scars too. My phone buzzed with a reminder about my upcoming meeting. I need to get back to work, I said, standing up. I suggest you have an honest conversation with Melody. If you want to talk further after that, call me and we can set up a time. I left them sitting there, my father still stunned, my mother wiping tears from her cheeks with a napkin. It wasn't a perfect resolution, not by any means, but it was the first truly honest conversation we'd had in decades, and that was something. As I walked back to my office building, I felt lighter somehow, as though I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying for far too long. The next 2 months were the longest period I had gone without speaking to my parents since leaving for college. After the confrontation at the cafe, I returned to my work and my life, waiting for them to process everything they had learned and decide how or if they wanted to move forward. It wasn't easy. Years of conditioning had me reaching for my phone to call them whenever something significant happened, good or bad. I had to consciously remind myself that I was establishing a necessary boundary, not punishing them or myself. I began seeing Dr. Winters, a therapist specializing in family dynamics, on Kyle's recommendation. Our weekly sessions helped me understand that what I had experienced growing up had a name: differential treatment, a form of family dysfunction that can cause lasting psychological damage to the less favored child. What you're feeling is normal, she assured me during one particularly difficult session. The grief, the anger, the confusion, these are all appropriate responses to your experience. The question is, what do you want your relationship with your family to look like going forward? It was a profound question, one that I had never really considered. I had always accepted the relationship as it was, trying to fit myself into the role they had assigned me. For the first time, I was considering that I had a say in defining that relationship. Meanwhile, I strengthened connections with what Dr. Winters called my chosen family friends like Kyle, who accepted me without condition or comparison. We hiked in upstate New York on weekends, had dinner at each other's apartments, watched bad movies and laughed until our sides hurt. These relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, were a revelation after years of striving for approval from my biological family. Then, 73 days after our confrontation, an email arrived from my father. The fact that he had emailed rather than called was significant in itself. He had always dismissed email as impersonal and lazy communication. "Cassius," it began, without his usual son salutation, "I've been trying to write this for weeks. Words don't come easily to me, especially these words. I owe you an apology, a big one. I've been unfair to you for most of your life. I favored your sister. I criticized you constantly. I dismissed your achievements. I was wrong." I read the paragraph several times, trying to process the fact that my father, who had never admitted fault in anything, who believed apologies were signs of weakness, was acknowledging his behavior toward me. The email continued. "Your mother and I have had many difficult conversations since that day in New York. We've also had some hard talks with Melody. The truth about her situation is worse than you told us. She's in significant debt. Her credit is ruined. The story she constructed about her success was entirely fictional. We're still coming to terms with how we missed the signs and how our expectations might have driven her to such deception." He went on to request a meeting not at my apartment or their house, but somewhere neutral where we could talk without the weight of family history pressing down on us. "If you're willing," he concluded, "I'd like to start getting to know my son, the real Cassius, not the person I wrongly assumed you were." I showed the email to Dr. Winters at our next session. "What do you think?" I asked after she'd read it. "I think it shows significant self-reflection on your father's part," she said. "That's not easy for someone with his personality type. The question is, are you ready for this meeting? What are your expectations? What boundaries do you need to maintain?" We spent the rest of the session discussing these questions, preparing me for whatever might come next. I replied to my father's email, suggesting we meet that weekend on a bench in Central Park, public enough to discourage any major emotional outbursts, private enough for honest conversation. He agreed. Saturday arrived with perfect early fall weather, crisp air, golden sunshine, leaves just beginning to hint at their coming transformation. I arrived early and watched my father approach from a distance. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the figure who had loomed so large in my childhood. "Cassius," he said as he reached the bench, extending his hand formally. I shook it, noting the unfamiliar gesture between us. When had we last shaken hands? Had we ever? "Thanks for coming," I said, gesturing for him to sit. The first few minutes were tense and awkward. We discussed the weather, the park, neutral topics that required no emotional investment. Then, during a lull in the conversation, my father spoke. "I've been trying to pinpoint when it started," he said, looking straight ahead rather than at me. "When I began treating you and Melody differently, your mother and I have talked about it a lot lately." "And?" I prompted when he paused. "I think it goes back to when you were born. Melody had been our only child for 2 years. She was challenging from the start, colicky, demanding, always needing attention. Then you came along, and you were so easy. You slept through the night early. You rarely cried. You seemed content just watching the world around you." He turned to look at me. I started giving Melody more attention because she seemed to need it more. You were so self-sufficient, even as a baby, and that pattern just continued." Melody demanded. We gave. You accepted whatever was offered. It was a startling insight, one I had never considered. My independence, which I had cultivated as a defense mechanism against their indifference, had actually helped trigger that indifference in the first place. "That doesn't excuse how we treated you," he continued. "But it helps me understand how it started. How something that might have made sense when you were infants became this destructive pattern that continued into adulthood." We talked for nearly 2 hours on that bench. My father spoke more openly than he ever had before about his own father's emotional distance, about the pressure he felt to succeed, about how he had unconsciously transferred those pressures to me while sheltering Melody from them. "I saw myself in you," he admitted, "and I think I was harder on you because of it, because I wanted you to be tougher than I was, more successful than I was. With Melody, I didn't have those expectations. She was allowed to fail in ways you weren't. It wasn't a perfect explanation or a complete absolution, but it was the beginning of understanding. the first step toward a different kind of relationship. "What about Mom?" I asked. "How is she processing all this?" "She's having a harder time," he admitted. She genuinely didn't see the favoritism. In her mind, she was giving each of you what she thought you needed. Melody needed encouragement. You needed independence. She's embarrassed now, looking back and seeing it from your perspective. "And Melody?" My father sighed heavily. "That's complicated. She started therapy, which is good. She's moved in with us temporarily while she tries to get back on her feet. The depth of her financial problems, it's going to take years to fix. And she's struggling with her identity now that the fiction she created has collapsed." I felt a complicated mixture of sympathy for my sister and lingering resentment. "Has she talked about why she let you believe the money was coming from her?" "She says it started as a misunderstanding, but then she couldn't bear to correct it because of how proud we were of her. One lie led to another until she was trapped in this elaborate fiction." It sounded like Melody, always the victim of circumstances rather than the author of her own choices. But I kept that thought to myself. "I don't expect things to change overnight," I told my father as our conversation wound down. "There's a lot of history between us, a lot of hurt feelings on all sides, but I'm willing to try if you are." "I'd like that," he said, and for the first time that day, I saw the glint of tears in his eyes. "Your mother and we've missed a lot. We'd like the chance to know who you really are, not who we assumed you were." In the months that followed, we established a new pattern of communication. Monthly video calls replaced sporadic, tension-filled visits. My parents made genuine efforts to ask about my work, my friends, my interests, topics that had rarely featured in our previous interactions. I kept my word about the financial arrangement. When they needed help with specific expenses, they asked directly, and I provided assistance when I could. It wasn't always comfortable. Old patterns of behavior don't disappear overnight, but it was honest in a way our relationship had never been before. My mother eventually called to offer her own apology, less eloquent than my father's but sincere in its way. "I never meant to make you feel less loved," she said, her voice breaking. "I just didn't know how to mother such different children. I got it wrong with both of you, in different ways." Melody and I established a fragile truce. She sent a text apologizing for the money situation, which felt inadequate but was a start. We weren't close, and might never be, but we were civil when family circumstances brought us together. Throughout this gradual healing process, I held firm to the boundaries I had established with Dr. Winter's help. I didn't allow criticism disguised as concern. I spoke up when old patterns emerged. I maintained my own life and priorities, even as I worked on rebuilding family connections. Healing isn't linear, Dr. Winters reminded me during a session marking 6 months since the confrontation. There will be setbacks, moments when old hurts resurface. The key is to acknowledge them without letting them dictate your response. She was right. There were difficult conversations, misunderstandings, times when I questioned whether the effort was worth it. But there were also moments of genuine connection that would have been impossible before my father asking for advice about retirement investments, my mother sending a thoughtful birthday gift that reflected my actual interests, a holiday gathering where I felt like a valued family member rather than an afterthought. We weren't a perfect family. We might never be. But we were moving towards something healthier than what we had before. The most profound change, though, wasn't in my parents or my sister, it was in me. I no longer measured my worth by their approval. I no longer felt the need to prove myself through financial success or career achievements. I had learned to validate my own experiences and emotions without external confirmation. In the process of standing up for myself, I had discovered my own strength, not the cold, defensive strength I had cultivated in opposition to my family's treatment, but something warmer and more authentic. The strength to be vulnerable, to set boundaries, to forgive without forgetting, to offer connection without sacrificing self-respect. Sometimes the truth hurts before it heals. Sometimes old wounds need to be reopened before they can properly mend. And sometimes, the family we build from the broken pieces of our past is stronger than the one we started with. Have you ever had to stand up to your family to be seen for who you really are? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Remember, it's never too late to set healthy boundaries and seek the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth is not defined by others' perception of you, even when those others are family.